Wow, it has been a cool, rainy spring here, and let me tell you, this garden has plumb taken off. Now, in the past 2 weeks, while I wasn't paying close attention, working on other things too much, these tomato plants have gotten dang near out of control. Now, the positive part of that is it gives us an opportunity to talk a lot about pruning tomatoes. This one in particular, you can see, is pretty wild. It's branching all over the place, but it's my intention to train it up this stake behind it. So why train a tomato up a stake in the first place? Well, for me, it's about space in the garden. I don't have that much space, and this is a good way to make efficient use of it. But there's also a case to be made that the single stem method produces fewer tomatoes, and therefore the tomatoes it does produce are larger because they're not competing for so much of the resources from other tomatoes. All right, let's talk about the tools of the trade. Today we only need two things. We need some Velcro. This is actually bundling Velcro like you would use to hold wires behind your TV or your computer together. I like using Velcro because I can loosen it as the stem grows, I can tighten it when needed, and I can reuse it season after season. Next up is a good pair of trimmers. I like these thin, skinny ones, these little guys. Why? Because it makes it easier for me to get into the tight places in these tangled up tomato vines and with some precision make the cuts I need. All right, so now the next step is to determine which of these stems we want to be our main one. If I would have done this properly from the very beginning and kept up with it, then it wouldn't be a decision. We'd just train the main stem all along. But it's not uncommon we get to a situation like this. So I'm going to go ahead and pick this stem, and I'm going to secure it with Velcro along my stake, just like that. That'll open things up so we can see what we're working with. All right. Now let's go ahead and secure this up here, because as these plants get heavier and the stems get longer, they start to flop over and they can do a good bit of damage to the stem. They can pinch it or sometimes even rip it. So let's get this main stem secured to the stake. All right, let me zoom in so you can see, and we're going to get down to it. You see all this mass of leaves hanging out on the ground there? Now that we have our main stem secured, we're just going to go in here and we're going to cut off these extra branches. Clean it up down here at the bottom of the stem. One of the advantages of waiting until a plant is well established like this is that they're pretty hardy. You can take some of these limbs off and it won't bother it too much. Now if we follow this main stem, the stem we've chosen to be our leading stem, up the stake where we've secured it twice, we can now find the growing tip right up here. Now that's what we want to continue to grow as the main stem, which will secure periodically along the stake. But here you can see in between the Y of the main stem, the growing tip, and the other leaves, we're just going to pinch this off. That's called a sucker. They grow in that Y between the main stem and the leaves, and if left to its own devices would grow into a whole nother stem, which we don't want. All right, now this is a healthy, robust tomato plant, and you can see here, although it's a little bit blurry, that it's already starting to put on some flowers. They haven't opened up yet, so it's hard to see, but that's what those are. So I want to be real careful. I want to reposition this stem such that those are hanging free. I don't want the developing tomatoes pressing up against the stake. That'll make it harder for them to develop cleanly. And I want to make sure that I am securing the stem above and below that cluster of would-be tomatoes, because their weight alone is going to put a lot of pressure on this stem. Well, you are in luck today. As some bonus footage, I happen to have 2 wild child tomatoes in the garden. If you've ever wondered what a tomato would look like if it was left completely to its own devices, well, here you go. It's just a tangle of vegetation sprawling all over the ground, choking out my little okra seedlings there that are coming up. No bueno. So we're going to straighten this thing out. All right, it's the same process as before. It just looks a little more daunting. You got to select your main stem, which I've done, and in this case I've selected the stem that has already tomatoes growing on it, and I'm slowly going to cut away the rest here. Now after a little bit of bushwhacking, we've come up with our main stem there. I'm pretty happy with this. We've still got some flowers on it. We've still got some tomatoes still on it. So now I've got the Velcro, and I'm going to start securing this main stem to the stake. Now again, ideally you'd do this from the very beginning. You'd train it right up, following that growing tip, pinching off any suckers, but I let this guy get a little bit out of hand. On the flip side of that, it's grown into a really robust plant before I've touched it with the shears. So I think it's going to do just fine with this trimming. So I'm going to secure it in about a foot intervals with this Velcro. Let's take a look at this here. You see that big cluster of tomatoes forming? There's a reason I placed the Velcro right under it, because I want to support that cluster of tomatoes. They're going to be heavy. That's where the most pressure is going to be on this stem. So I secure it right there. All right, all that's left to do now is to secure the rest of the main stem to the stake here. So get myself some more Velcro, and again, about a foot or so from the last Velcro, we're going to look for a good place to secure it, conscious of any clusters of tomatoes that we might need to secure, because again, they're going to be a lot of weight. Gravity is going to do its work on them to pull against and tug against these Velcro ties. All right, now let's zoom in on the tip of this spear. See that growing tip there? That's going to become the main stem, and I'm going to tie it up at 1 foot intervals all the way up this stake. But if you look in the Y between that main stem and the leaves, you'll see these little suckers. Well, we know what to do with them, because if left alone, they're going to become additional stems. So we're going to get in there with our fingers, just a thumb and a forefinger, and pinch it off. And just like that, we've got a tomato staked and ready to grow. Well, I hope you've had as much fun as I have, and if you have, next up we're going to be studying how to prune our tomatoes in cages. So see you soon.